Welcome to the Fort Southwick D-Day tunnels, the underground communications headquarters that were built specifically by the Royal Navy. What I like to do is just very quickly introduce myself. My name's Samuel, I'm a guide for Experience Hampshire. I'm actually a local history teacher, teach very close to here, have been for 18 years, 11 to 16-year-olds, love it, it's good fun, honestly. Okay, just to very quickly put these tunnels and the fort in their historical perspective and context, what actually happened is that in 1860, there was a commission established by someone called Lord Palmerston, and it was for the defence of the realm, defence of the United Kingdom. And it was one of his ideas to surround Portsmouth with about 22 forts. Many of them are still standing today. We're beneath Fort Southwick, which is the highest of 4 forts on top of the hill. And at the time, people looked at him like he was a little bit mad. Are you sure, sir? Are we going to raise the money, the resources for this? The French invasion? I think you've been reading way too many spy thrillers. And did you know that if you fired a cannon from on top of the hill, it wouldn't actually reach the dockyard? But he was at pains to point out that actually he was trying to build 4 inward land-facing forts just in case the French completely encircled the place. As you sort of come into the tunnels here, you would have noticed a very steep bank, a very steep hill. That's nothing more than a Victorian slag heap, really, just because I like saying slag heap. And that was created when Fort Southwick above us dug out its tunnels and its foundations and deposited the rubble over the side. Now, it made it slightly easier for the 172nd tunnellers to begin their task in 1942. Why the 172nd? Why 1942? The 172nd were chosen because during the First World War, they were some of the first to tunnel under the German trenches and help set the explosives. So they really knew what they were doing. Why 1942? Well, right at the end of 1941, the Americans had been dragged into the Second World War. And really from that moment onwards, Stalin had been begging, near blackmailing them to open up a second front. He felt like he was fighting the war all by himself in the East. And they were at pains to say, yeah, we will. But actually, they didn't really know where, and they didn't really know when. The one thing they were certain of is that any operation that we now know today as D-Day was going to need a secret communications headquarters for the Navy in Portsmouth. And they chose beneath Fort Southwick because it already had a naval operation. So work began February 1942, and it took the 172nd tunnellers 10 months just to tunnel these out. And by the time we finish the sort of route tonight, I think you're going to be impressed just by that fact alone, let alone anything else that the tunnels have to say. Obviously, this is about the Navy, and so I like to sort of start with a very personal account. And it's from this lady. Her name was Sarah Skippy Wilson, and she worked down here as a wren during D-Day, and she actually wrote a poem about it. It's called 10-Minute Stand Down of a Wren. It's nighttime here on Portsdown Hill, and everywhere is dark and still. There are stars in the sky, all shining and bright, but down in the town, no sign of a light to be seen. It's so restful and peaceful up here on the hill. I wish it could always be so, but it's not what it seems away from dreams. It's bustling with life down below. Below in the hill all is not still, for working like bees in a hive are soldiers, sailors and airmen, and ATS and WAFs and Wren passing signals and codes, with TP radios and switchboard, all very much alive. Up here on the hill where all is so still and inside a busy beehive. I sit and I dream and I sigh and I wonder, just wonder, why? Let's go and find out. As we come into these tunnels now, it doesn't seem like a tunnel system, but we are underground. But also what you're not coming into is actually a living, working museum. There is no models here. There's no great video projection and descriptions, paintings, nothing like that. It's you, me, and our imaginations. Okay, but that's why I love teaching history at school, because you've got to use your imagination. Otherwise, you're just kind of looking around and going, oh yeah, look, it's some metal. But every now and again, you do get these glimpses into the past. Not a lot remains, but some of it is, and we can tell that story as we go through the tunnels tonight. But as you are looking up and around, you sort of see a load of signs, a CCTV. Well, that's not D-Day, is it? Of course it's not. A lot of this stuff, paraphernalia, belongs to someone called UCAP Airsoft. They actually have the lease for these tunnels, and they've done pretty well to maintain it, and they come down here and have fun and shoot at each other with these little plastic bullets. All right, so that's, you know, what happens today, but we're more interested in what has happened in the past. So, you know, let's get straight into these tunnel systems and into our first room, which, room, isn't that an interesting word to use to describe the tunnel systems? But that's exactly what they were, about 108 of them. There were offices down here, conference rooms, teletyping pools, heavy machinery was operated down here. I think genuinely and hope your minds are going to be blown by it. So let's go into one of our first rooms. Here we go. As we sort of look up and around, we've got to be careful not to interact too closely with these walls. There's a little bit of damp and mold damage, of course, but now that your attention is up and around, you can kind of see up here, and you might be forgiven for thinking, oh my God, has there been some kind of fire down here then? Well, actually, if there had been, you'd be looking for soot and scorch marks, which there are none. What you're actually looking at is rotting adhesive. It's where the wood panelling would have been glued and screwed to these metal beams. Okay, and they would have been everywhere in the tunnels. Now this is one of 3 of the largest rooms, okay, and I'm going to show you a photo in a minute of it. You know, UCAP Airsoft, they've played a little bit with some of the dimensions of the rooms for their purposes, fair enough, but this is original size. Okay, so just to get that reference, roughly from where you are, where you're stood now, this is what the room would have looked like. Okay, and what you're actually looking at is GPO carrier equipment. There's transmitters in there, you know, huge cabinets of equipment. All right, and that's why it needed to be sort of stretched up so high. And these little trenches here, they would have been filled with wood up until recently, but they've been filled in because the wood was rotting. And it just shows you that these tunnels would have been temporary. Everything in them and about them was temporary, because these cabinets, these transmitter and receivers, they would have been wheeled in and then screwed into the floor, slotted together like so many pieces of Lego, and then when they weren't needed anymore, they'd have been unscrewed and wheeled out and taken aboard ship. Everything about these tunnels was supposed to be temporary. When they were first built, it was for the D-Day operations only, and any turnaround operation just in case it went wrong. You may have noticed some of the old black and white photos out there. They were taken in 1945, right at the end of the Second World War. What's incredible about this photo is that it's good to sort of see how the room would have looked, but also when it was taken. This photo was taken in 1957, long after D-Day, long after these tunnels were supposed to be filled in by the Admiralty because they didn't need them anymore. So why is that? Well, obviously we have the start and well and truly into the Cold War, and that's why this tunnel system was needed once more. Okay, so much more to see. Just watch your steps as you're coming through. Can be very uneven, the flooring. Okay, so let's have a look here. Here seems to be a plan of the tunnels, but this is just for UCAT purposes. It's where they have their games, because wouldn't it be lovely if it did include a pub? But this is actually the plan of the tunnels. It's 1.5 miles of tunnels. It's incredible, isn't it? Very impressive. Wrens and Ratings would have referred to this place as the Warren, and I think you can understand why. Most of these numbers, they do, for the most part, they tally up to something for the most part. But the Navy being the Navy, some of these were purposefully deceptive and misleading. They called them Q rooms. And I'm actually going to show you physical evidence for that later tonight. Here, there's 2 tram lines that go all the way through. Okay, 2 pathways, 2 small lanes that go through the entire tunnel system without numbers. The Wrens and the Ratings would have referred to those as the freeways. Interesting that they chose the American vernacular, perhaps indicating that there were American service personnel working down here. Or actually, it just could have been a clever play on words, because it was the only area that they were allowed to freely go. They just wouldn't have had the security clearance for a great many of these offices. You came in tonight through emergency exit 3. Okay, that's where you've actually come, and we're going to be heading up this way. There were 3 other emergency exits, but they're all blocked up now. The Admiralty filled them with granite and concrete when they left. So we're going to head up this way, and we're actually going to go into a very similar room that we've just been into. So remembering that photo, but obviously it looks very different today. Just watch your heads and step as you come through. As we do look up and around, don't forget down. Don't need to trip up or stumble, but well, you can see here that we are well and truly into the bedrock of chalk. There is no loose rubble or slag heap to claw away. No, this is the bedrock. And actually you can sort of make out lines here of flint. Nothing abnormal about that. Of course, geologically speaking, they do live side by side. Just be careful, it can get a bit wet and slippy here. I'll explain why that is the case in a moment. Just watch the steps as we go up on through. Now, of course, if you were a Wren or a Rating, you would not have been allowed to walk up through here, because this is where all of the offices, where some of the offices would have been, all interconnecting. So you would not have been allowed to come up this way. You'd had to come the long way around through the freeway. But we are now very, very dark and into the tunnels. Just be careful of the little step there. Okay. So, again, more splashes and lines of flint. But as we do look up and around, you're starting to notice these divot marks and these little holes here. as we continue to sort of look around, you can make all of those out, can't you? And then you realise they're everywhere. Absolutely everywhere you go in the tunnels. And what they are, they're the drill marks and the chiselling marks, okay? This was all done by hand. There's no great mechanical claw-like marks anywhere in these tunnels. They certainly didn't use dynamite. It was during the middle of the Second World War. You know, they were really desperately trying to keep this secret as much as they could. You might notice some iron crowbarring perhaps, also a little bit of raking possibly to get it off, but that's it. It was all done by hand. Well, this would have created quite a bit of rubble, even in the very short distance that we've walked so far. So what on earth did they actually do with it? Well, some of it did actually go down the side of the hill. The motorway wasn't there, the housing estate wasn't there. But think about this logically. It's chalk. It's like a bright white beacon from the sky. And the Nazis would have absolutely just realised there was something suspicious and bombed the hell out of it. So what did they do? Well, they actually started to paint the chalk to try and cover it up, what they were doing here. They laid camouflage, they made little fake trees and bushes, but that's just not logical to keep doing that. I had a retired surveyor, he calculated that there was 19,752 cubic feet of chalk from these tunnels. That's 8 Olympic-sized swimming pools. So where on earth did it go? Well, some of it would have been used in local foundation work for roads, possibly. Some of it would have been used for temporary wall buildings, whether they be billets or, you know, training areas or anti-aircraft guns, whatever it might have been. They could have been used for foundation work. And funnily enough, I had a lady come on the tour about 1.5 years ago, and she was a little girl in Gosport, and she said she can distinctly remember truck after truck emptying chalk out onto their parkland and even on their roads, and they were told it was to deaden the impact for the many tanks that were now entering the town in preparation for D-Day. Even today, when you cut up, dig some roads or gardens in Gosport, you get a synthetic layer of chalk. Of course, chalk sometimes, it's not too bad tonight, but a little bit spongy there. Yeah, you can see that. Well, you know, that's perfectly natural. Chalk is porous, it attracts moisture. It's going to be a bit like that. But where on earth does that moisture come from if we're in the tunnels? Well, some of it is our condensation for sure. And when they come down here for the UCAP adventures. But actually, we've just walked up and it's a little bit puddly. And sometimes the puddles can be 3 or 4 inches deep. Where on earth does that come from? Okay, well, I'm going to prove to you later that these tunnels don't actually have a problem with flooding. However, about 15 yards back that way, above us on the ground, is the main road. And in the mid-1970s, there was some repairs, and whoever was doing them accidentally cut through the waterproofing membrane. And from that moment on, and they never repaired it, the tunnels have actually started to leak. So when we sort of see little pools of water, it's not because of the original engineering, it's because of what happened afterwards. And it's really kind of hard for us to imagine that this was a functioning office. Through there, okay, that was a typewriting pool, and it would have been full of ladies on typewriters. No, I'm not being sexist, it's just how it would have actually been. You know, panelled, walled, flooring, functioning offices. Very hard to believe, but that's certainly the case. Okay, continuing. Now, we are just about to go on to our first freeway. We're going to turn right. A quick look left, and you can kind of get a gauging of going all the way down to the bottom, and there's the top. Okay, so here you can blink and you can miss some things in the tunnel. This was a bolt hook, and it came out about 6 inches, and attached to it would have been some rope, This rope would have gone down to a canvas sheet, and that sheet was about 6 foot. Again, at the end of the canvas sheet, rope to another hook. Now look at this. All the way down the freeway and all the way up the freeway. Sometimes on another level and on another freeway, and you can see another level there. What on earth was this? Temporary bunk beds. Temporary bunk beds right there. During D-Day, there was about 650 to 700 service personnel down here. Had they ever needed to, they could have kept them down here for about 6 weeks. And it just seems incredible, doesn't it, that this is really where they would have slept them. I'm going to be able to show you and prove to you in the tunnels tonight just exactly how they would have been able to sustain that number of people, which is quite a lot. They didn't ever actually do it, but they could have done. And when I was a young chap, I've grown up in this area, you know, my entire life, and there were rumours that there was an entire village inside the hill, and so I was expecting a pub, a butcher's, a baker's, a grocer's. None of that is down here, but like I say, you can almost, you know, understand where those rumours come from. When they had that number of people down here, they could have sustained them for that length of time. They must have been able to do it, and like I say, I'm going to show you how that was possible. There are a number of rumours about tunnels and forts in Portsmouth and the connections. There just isn't that great number of connections, I'm afraid, as wonderful as it would have been, and there's bundles of conspiracy theories. I don't need to waste any of your time with those right now, but let's go round the corner and see the entrances. Here we go. Well, it's all got a little bit Cold War down here, hasn't it? Okay, so this is the bit where I'd normally ask people which way they think north is, and I get some strange guesses from all the way up, but actually north is that way. And I ask it because it just, you know, just to remind us that actually they can be very disorientating, these tunnels, and you can just imagine the hecticness of some of those periods in history where people would have been running around these corridors, the freeways, and in and out of offices. Just must have been frantic at points. Okay, so if you remember from earlier in the tour, I said that we entered emergency exit 3, okay, and that I was going to show you the entrances. Well, there are actually 3, and here's the 2 main ones. Okay, you cannot access those ones down there, and there's one that's already been sort of sealed up, and so we can't access this one. But in a moment, if we want to, we can go and explore this entrance. But don't forget, you've entered a tunnel system, but you haven't come down. In fact, you've gone up by about 3.5, 4 feet. We actually entered through what is called an adit, which is a technical term, a mining term for a horizontal entrance. So yeah, you've actually come up a little bit, and to come down into the tunnels, obviously you would need to come down some steps, and here they are. Okay, well, the Navy, being the Navy, in typical black humour, would have put a little stick man at the bottom, and he's kind of flexing his muscles, and he's almost sort of jeering at you. Oh, you think you're strong, do you? And then there's a little number by him, 168. I wonder what that could mean. So yeah, the number of steps up. All right, now, the thing is, when you're a Wren, you got given 2 pairs of shoes. You got given your flats for a sailing, ship posting, and when you were working in an office, you got given heels. This was considered an office, and so they would have to have walked up those in their heels. I haven't got my heels on tonight, but I'm going to walk up. And there was also a lovely story about that Wrens used to walk up here and take them 2 by 2. All right. I can't manage that either. So we're going to do this, and it is quite a way up. But what is interesting is this little stick man, okay, he actually appears a bit later on, but his countenance changes. Let's keep an eye on him. Safely does it. Take the railing. These steps are slippy. They're original. Obviously you can see where the repair work has been done, but that lattice effect, that was stenciled into the concrete. Instead of buying loads of grip and what have you, they just stenciled it into the concrete. But you can sort of see where some of it has sort of fallen away. So here's our first change in Stickman. He's not giving it the big uns now, is he? Okay, so that's us about halfway. Here's another Stickman. Yes, we're feeling a bit like that. Last stretch. We can do it. Well, Stickman doesn't look like he can do it, but despite how demanding it is physically, I think it's a really good activity to do. It's what they did. Makes us think. Well, here's the final Stickman, and yeah, I'm almost feeling like that. Whew. Now, this is as far as we can go because the forts are privately owned. Incredibly though, there's a lift, but it's actually a dumbwaiter. All right, now this is the original one, and there's one more floor to go up, and then we're at ground almost, and we'll actually be immediately behind the Victorian main archway. This goes up 2 more, and above that main Victorian archway was a Victorian kitchen. And during D-Day, the commanding officers, they all had their food prepared there, and then it was sent down using this. Here, just through here, just on the left, there is an extractor fan. Ooh, an extractor fan. Well, actually, I think it is a tiny bit of a woo, because it shows you that even in the 1940s, they cared about taking that bad air out and getting rid of it. And I'll show you a bit later on in the tour how they replaced it. All right, so here we are. This is all original, okay? It was painted with bitumen to stop any kind of water leaking. And apart from sort of occasional areas of oxidization, bubbling and what have you, it's held up pretty well, hasn't it, for 80 odd years. And like I was mentioning, the steps are largely original. New railings, of course, but you can sort of see some of the old fixtures here. All right, okay. In terms of the wrens and the ratings, they could be billeted, you know, certainly during D-Day, the end of the Second World War, they could be billeted as far apart as Fareham to Chichester, and they'd need to be bussed in. So a great operation, as I'm sure you can appreciate with the numbers you've heard already. And there were 2 entrances, and under great camouflage, canvas camouflage, and the protection of the fort, they could sort of come into work. And there's always one story of a wren that particularly hits me, and she was working immediately before the D-Day operations embarked, and she stood just before she came down the entrance, looked out over the harbour, and she said the water was so jam-packed with ships that she could have walked from Fareham Creek all the way round to Langstone Harbour without getting her feet wet. Incredible. She did her shift, came back up the steps, 2 by 2 of course, remember, then looked back out over the harbour, completely empty. Must have been so spooky, breathtaking. Okay, we're going to head back down now. Please take care, these steps are crumbling. Right, onwards, here we go, into the heart of darkness. This is always a great shot to encourage photos, but that goes right down to the bottom, so that's the entire length of the tunnels just there. So here, this is the deepest point of the tunnels. It's 100 foot directly to the surface. All right, we're a long way underneath chalk here. The tunnels don't actually go any further that way, although right here. Now this little room is the only room that does go any further. It even had its own name. It was called DCHQ, which stood for Damage Control Headquarters. So if there was any kind of disaster that befell these tunnels, those in charge would have dashed here, sealed themselves in, there was a separate extractor fan for them, and then come up with a plan of just what they were going to do to rescue these tunnels. Seems incredible, doesn't it? But that's exactly what this was. Now we're in another long stretch of tunnel that has none of the metal beamed support. The Romans taught us that you can tunnel in chalk without really using any kind of reinforcement, and in fact only about 5% of the actual tunnels are reinforced, and there's a little bit just there, but a lot of the metal, the beams, was taken away. No one really knows why. There's a couple of suspicions of they were looking for audio recording devices, bugging equipment, so that could have been the case. Now that might sound bizarre, but actually when you consider just what this room actually used to be, it might make a bit of sense, because it used to be a naval cipher room. Codes, intelligence passing through their hands. Can you imagine the value of it right there and then? Well, you know, were they really looking for bugging equipment, audio recording devices? Maybe, but it makes even more sense when you consider what happened next door. Now there are steps as we go in, so just be very careful. Here we go. Just be careful. Well, here we are. Welcome to the plotting room. But it's really more of a hall, isn't it? We're deep underground in this big cavernous room. Well, we're not in the centre of the tunnels, but we absolutely are central to the operations. This room was really what it was all about. Over there was a mezzanine flooring. Okay, you can just kind of make that out there. And it overlooked a huge table that was just there. And this table had a version of this map on it. Now, hopefully we recognise just what we're looking at here. It is, of course, the Normandy beaches, Overlord. We have the American beaches there, Utah and Omaha. We have the British-Canadian beaches just here, Gold Juno Sword, the backup beach Band. There's not a lot of people that actually know what these beaches are named after, and it's fish. Goldfish, swordfish, bandfish. Juno, not a fish. Originally it was called jelly, but it's rumoured that the Canadian command wanted it changed because they didn't want their soldiers running into Jellyfish Beach. Okay, here, these semicircles, for the most part, are the reach and range of the German defensive guns. And this information was meticulously gathered by the French resistance. It created a small funnel here, which understandably the Germans peppered with thousands of mines. 24 hours before Operation Neptune, this was all mine swept. Then the resources all gathered together in preparation for the Overlord landings. In the first few moments of D-Day, there was about 4.5 messages that came flooding into this room. It must have been utter chaos. When the first landings happened, the Americans had to report in their position and casualties, and they spoke to Wrens 2 offices away. Some of these Wrens have spoken about those calls, those radio calls, and they could hear in the backgrounds explosions, the cracks of bullets, and the screams of men. Now, some of those wrens taking those calls were 17 years of age. It's incredible, isn't it? Well, here's a photo of what the room would have looked like, and we're kind of looking at it a little bit backwards because it's down there, obviously. But what's nice is you see the plaque on the top left. That was actually painted by the wrens. The original's in the D-Day Museum, and there's a copy out in the foyer, and it just says, "This blessed plot." Isn't that rather sweet? All right, okay. As we were looking sort of up and around here, you might be able to sort of just pick out that these huge metal beams are in two pieces, and they're joined just at the top by two huge bolts. Okay, how on earth did they get these down here? You've walked in an exit, you've walked down an entrance. Everything had to be carried in by hand, no matter how big or how heavy. It was at this point in the tour, though, that about a year and a half ago, a lady suddenly spoke up, and she said that she had been an officer down here between 1961 and 1963, and she was looking around and just shaking her head at me, and I thought, oh my God, what have I done? What have I said that's wrong? And all it was is she could not believe the change. When she was looking around, all that came back to her was that all of this had gone. This wasn't here. In her words, this was plush carpeting, finely decorated wood panelling with two huge conference tables down the far end. And then it dawned on me. 61-3, I said. She said, yeah, that's right. I said, so you were here with NATO and the Americans during the Cuban Missile Crisis? She said, yeah, absolutely right. I said, my God, you helped prevent nuclear war. She just shrugged her shoulders because all she was worried about was the carpeting and the panelling. Isn't that wonderful? Okay, we're going to go into a very small, dark, dank room now. Just be careful, there's a bit of a step down, but I think you'll be intrigued by the discoveries that have been made down here. Okay, excellent. All right, please be careful. So this, you can see we've worked out as an RAF teleprinter room. They had small operations here, by no means an HQ or even really a listening post, but a couple of teleprinters in this office, nice touch with the old coat on the door, and it would have gone straight out onto the freeway here. But how can we be absolutely certain that this is really what we're looking at here? Well, actually, it's an architectural anomaly. Can you see where the walls aren't quite flush there? And that's right here, isn't it? However, the reason we're in here is not because of flush and unflush walls, but because of what was discovered when these panels were all removed. It was UCAP Airsoft that removed them, and thank goodness they did, because they preserved for us some quite wonderful discoveries. Graffiti. Some of it just tells us where they were from, their name, and where they were from. Some of them rather more brave, like this chap from Newcastle, where, he says, men are men and women are glad of it. Good God, can we say that today? All right, this chap, he might have been local because he's written Isle of Wight. And I say might have been because he spelt it differently underneath, Isle of Wight. But what's nice about this one is the date, 1942, of course, when they tunnelled out and then would have done all of this. Do you like work? Someone else asks. Trade test department for idlers, for loafers, for non-workers and won't work, and NCOs. They had to get in a little dig, didn't they? Brilliant. Okay, follow me out. Step. Okay, on to our second freeway. We're turning left now. So again, you can sort of see these knocked in hooks that I've talked about already. Just going down the other the other freeway. And almost round every corner there's the strange paraphernalia of UCAP. You can see computers all in there, but that's not real D-Day, but this is. This is D-Day original. It's the longest stretch in the tunnels, surviving stretch, of air conditioning. Okay, so we've seen how they extracted the bad air, and this is how they replaced it and replenished it. Now, it didn't stretch in every single office, but certainly a really good spread around the tunnel sort of system. Okay, and there's not any other sort of stretch this long anywhere else. But actually, you know, where are we? Well, if you look through here, you can see on the flooring tiles. And it's the only area in the tunnel system that is tiled on the floor. And tiling on the floor usually indicates, doesn't it, one of three things: some kind of cleanliness, medical perhaps, or food preparation. And we're in the galleys. All right, so this is where food was prepped, and it was surrounded by about 5 wardrooms. So this is where they would have eaten. Okay, and actually here we have these. Now I know some of the viewers might actually know that these are the GPO carrier boxes, General Post Office, that would then become British Telecom. So this was all the communications cabling would have been under here. But why am I pointing them out right now? Well, we're in the kitchens, and these were not laid until 1957. So again, it shows you just the sheer scale of the operation, and they overhauled it all. Interestingly enough, they've taken crowbars to all of these, because these are everywhere in the tunnels, absolutely everywhere, and they've taken crowbars to every single manhole cover. Not a millimetre is left of the cabling. There isn't a single bit. All right, let's walk through here. Now, I'm just about to shine my torch up here, but I need to close my mouth because I'm looking directly up 100 foot to a manhole cover. And you should be able to see all the way up, 100 foot, there we go. Now, there's another one here, and again, why, as a tour guide, it's always great to listen and hear people's stories. One chap told me that his great uncle was a fitter down here in the early 1970s, and when he found out he was going on the tour, he said to him, "Go and find the 2 big pipes." Why? He said, "That's where we used to drop our tools down to work." Can you believe that? Incredible. Just a little step down here as we back onto a freeway. Okay, just very quickly, going to back up onto myself. But here, we've passed a few of these. And I always get people to guess what they actually are. Some people think wine holders, but these were for fire extinguishers, believe it or not. And here, these little hooks, some of us will remember the red buckets filled with sand. That's where they would have dangled those. Now here, this is perhaps the highlight of the tour for some people. The Great British Tradition. So let's get in and see what all this is about. Coat hangers here. Okay, this might give us a bit of a better idea as we go through. And despite all the colloquial nicknames for them, it's clear we are in the toilets. Now here's a challenge for us. Can we actually get through? Oh, I think I could just about manage it. There we go. Might you be able to do that? Yes, yes. Okay, good. Here we are, an R rating. Excellent. These were the gents' toilets, and we've had to sneak through that wall because that was a dividing wall. That first bank of toilets was actually for the officers, and these were for the ratings. Male toilets. Just down here, which we can't actually get into, are the female toilets. Okay, these were not segregated by rank. Okay. Well, if you remember earlier in the tour, I said that I'm going to prove to you that some of these rooms were deceptive, queue rooms. These two rooms don't appear on the map, but here they are. So, you know, what is so unmentionable about these rooms? Now, as we go through and take a look round, we've got to be careful. It's the most uneven area in the tunnel, so just be careful you don't trip. But actually, what might this have been? Is this a clue here? What about this? Okay. So, what we actually have in these two rooms was a diesel generator. Now, this wasn't a battle station, so it would be nice to sort of say it was an armoury, a dungeon, an interrogation room maybe, but it was still nonetheless incredibly important. If you think about it in these terms, that the plot room was the brain of the operation, well, this was absolutely the thumping heart. You take this room out, there was no operation. The diesel was brought down in barrels. There was no pipeline in. I'm no engineer, as I think we're all beginning to realise, and this is the exhaust pipe, if you will. It would have entered there. And it actually comes from another room as well. And we'll sneak into there in a moment. That's the boiler room. But just quickly, here we have a 3.5 foot hole. This had two purposes. One, it acted as the sump. And two, if you remember early in the tour, I said I'm going to prove to you that there isn't a problem with flooding. Well, here it is. This is an emergency drain. Incredibly, it stretches all the way up to the plot room, another 80 to 100 yards. And when there's local heavy precipitation, sure enough, it does actually start to fill up. All right, but like I said, it's about 3.5 foot deep, and the most I've ever seen it fill to is 10 inches. Then when the rain subsides, it actually drains within a couple of days and is bone dry. The engineering still works. Okay, we're going to squeeze through to the boiler room. Now, it is a bit of a tight space, so be careful of walking in and your head and banging on pipes. My goodness me. But here it is. Obviously, the boiler's long gone, but you get a very good idea of where it would have been. Careful as we come through. Well, we're back onto the first freeway, and right at the top is where some of you might have taken photos, a great photo op, and then this comes down to another emergency exit. This meanders about 30 yards through the chalk out towards the car park, but the Admiralty blocked it up with granite and concrete when they left. Here, well, this whole area that we've just kind of walked, this would have been a very noisy, dirty, smelly part of the tunnels. You had the generator through there. This is the boiler room here. And right where I'm stood, you can kind of see the outline and remains of a wall. And this is where the fuel would have been stored for that boiler room through there. And what they actually used was coke, not coal. Coke burns at a higher temperature, gives off a clearer smoke. It's the common sense choice, really. And as you walk sort of through, you can see where the coke ate through this metal casing and stained the actual chalk. So there we go. Okay. All right, well, this is where the tour actually ends. This is the last stop. And one of the questions I always try and pose is, did these tunnels fulfill their objective? Well, of course, the D-Day operations were very successful, despite the casualties, but that's not actually what I mean. What I mean is, did they keep the people down here safe and secret? Well, I had studied German maps of the local area, particularly Kosham, close by, and they had no idea whatsoever about these tunnels, none whatsoever. Local bombing didn't really get close, even though they had an awareness of the fort above us. So really, you know, what damage could have been done to these tunnels in and around the wartime era? Well, the Nazis did have a huge siege cannon, but it's so big that it had to be placed on a specially built train, but it was just moved too slowly. It could never have got anywhere near to do any kind of damage. So these tunnels would have been well protected through the Second World War, there's no doubt about that. But just very quickly to sort of say that obviously with the Cold War and the development of mad technology and bombs, that these tunnels would have been seriously threatened, and certainly by 1962 with 2 megaton warheads, these tunnels would have been a goner, I'm afraid, with that kind of technology. Just to sort of bring up very quickly, the last sort of full military operation that actually happened here was something called Operation Crusader. And that came about because on Christmas Day 1979, the Russians invaded Afghanistan, and the British Army calls up 30,000 troops to sort of train them and to then send them over to West Germany to stand to. And they did so by using these tunnels. Not every single one of them, but most of them. And it was quite funny because on a tour that I was doing, I had a chap say, "Oh my God, I was on that, Operation Crusader, yeah, 1980, down here, that was me." I'm like, "Brilliant, what can you tell us? Can you remember anything?" "No, not a thing, mate, not a thing." What an opportunity missed. But that was the last major military event to happen down here. And the Navy, they move all of the communications technology upstairs into Fort Southwick in the new single floor ComSen centre, and then they move it again out to Northwood, and that process is all completed really by about 1999, and then we have private ownership of these tunnels, and we're still allowed to come and explore and have a little look round. So there we go. I hope you've enjoyed it. Thank you for listening, watching.